Tonight, the University United Methodist Church welcomes you to its space here tonight. It does advise visitors to consider wearing masks, although they're not required, especially if you're vaccinated. We've tried to set up the room for good distancing, but if you're uncomfortable in the distance between you and another, please feel free to move your chair. Those of you sitting out there in the virtual land, of course, you can move your chairs too. My name is Terry Link, and I'll moderate this evening's program. On behalf of the Greater Lansing United Nations Association and the Lansing Area Peace Education Center, I'm a board member of each, and many other organizations I'll mention shortly. I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening to an important discussion of how together we might respond at the community level to the increasing threats of climate destabilization. We're going to show a brief video here real quick of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' remarks just a couple of weeks ago with the release of the 6th IPCC assessment report. And hang on, and then we'll come back to the program.
The jury has reached a verdict, and it is damning. This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a litany of broken climate promises. It is a file of shame, cataloguing the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster. Major cities underwater, unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, widespread water shortages, the extinction of 1 million species of plants and animals. And this is not fiction or exaggeration. It is what science tells us will result from our current energy policies. We are on a pathway to global warming of more than double the 1.5-degree limit agreed in Paris. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic. This is a climate emergency. Climate scientists warn that we are already perilously close to tipping points that could lead to cascading and irreversible climate impacts. But high-emitting governments and corporations are not just turning a blind eye. They are adding fuel to the flames. They are choking our planet based on their vested interests and historic investments in fossil fuels, when cheaper, renewable solutions provide green jobs, energy security, and greater price stability. We left COP26 in Glasgow with a naive optimism based on new promises and commitments. But the main problem, the enormous growing emissions gap, was all but ignored. And the science is clear. To keep the 1.5-degree limit agreed in Paris within reach, we need to cut global emissions by 45% this decade. But current climate pledges would mean a 14% increase in emissions. And most major emitters are not taking the steps needed to fulfill even these inadequate promises. Climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals. But the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. Investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness. Such investments will soon be stranded assets, a blot on the landscape and a blight on investment portfolios. But it doesn't have to be this way. Today's report is focused on mitigation, cutting emissions. It sets out viable, financially sound options in every sector that can keep the possibility of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees alive. First and foremost, we must triple the speed of the shift to renewable energy. And that means moving investments and subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables now. In most cases, renewables are already far cheaper. It means governments ending the funding of coal, not just abroad, but at home. And it means climate coalitions made up of developed countries, multilateral development banks, private financial institutions, and corporations with adequate technologies supporting major emerging economies in making this shift. It means protecting forests and ecosystems as powerful climate solutions. It means rapid progress in reducing methane emissions. And it means implementing the pledges made in Paris and Glasgow. Leaders must lead. But all of us can do our part. We owe a debt to young people, civil society, and indigenous communities for sounding the alarm and holding leaders accountable. We need to build on their work to create a grassroots movement that cannot be ignored. If you live in a big city, a rural area, or a small island state, if you invest in the stock market, if you care about justice and our children's future, I am appealing directly to you. Demand that renewable energy is introduced now at speed and at scale. Demand an end to coal-fired power. Demand an end to all fossil fuel subsidies. Today's report comes at a time of global turbulence. Inequalities are at unprecedented levels. The recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is scandalously uneven. Inflation is rising, and the war in Ukraine is causing food and energy prices to skyrocket. But increasing fossil fuel production will only make matters worse. Choices made by countries now will make or break the commitment to 1.5 degrees. A shift to renewables will mend our broken global energy mix and offer hope to millions of people suffering climate impacts today. Climate promises and plans must be turned into reality and action now. It's time to stop burning our planet and start investing in the abundant renewable energy all around us.
This evening, we are focused on what we can do as a community at the community level. As that report clearly demonstrates, we can't afford to wait for the increasing partisan Congress to lead the way. We must see that citizens and local communities must forge the way together, as they are now doing in communities around the state and across the globe. Tonight, we will hear from 3 climate action leaders bringing their communities together to forge solutions and strengthen community responses to impending threats. The Greater Lansing United Nations Association is committed to engaging in solutions to the globally agreed upon 17 Sustainable Development Goals, agreed to by all 193 nations, members of the United Nations in 2015, and to be achieved by 2030, just 8 short years from now. Goal 13 of the 17 is indeed climate action, from which tonight's title is center stage. But all the goals are interconnected. And so we will necessarily address tonight goals 11, which is sustainable cities and communities, goal 7, which is affordable and clean energy, goal 17, which is partnership for the goals, and goal number 5, gender equality. The last one may not seem quite so apparent, but will be demonstrated by the people we've chosen to speak with us tonight, who are leaders fighting the fight in the communities near us here in the state of Michigan. Before I introduce each of them, I need to outline our program and to handle a few housekeeping issues. Bathrooms are out my door to the right and just up the ramp if you need to utilize those. This event is being streamed live and it will be recorded. We will post it later on the GLUNA website so that those who couldn't make it tonight, either virtually or in person, will have access to the great information you're about to be introduced to. This program came together with the help of key members of the GLUNA leadership team, including Board President Bob Barnhart. Bob, wave your hand. Hakan Yildiz, who is working the magic on the technology tonight, along with Samantha Dillon, our executive assistant over here, and Tasin Sadar, who couldn't be with us tonight. So please join me in thanking them for their efforts to get this thing off the ground. We are also fortunate to have many co-sponsors of this event, besides the GLUNA and the Peace Education Center, including the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, Michigan Climate Action Network, League of Women Voters Lansing, Lansing Environmental Action Team, A20, Meridian Township Energy Team, University United Methodist Church, the Islamic Center of Greater Lansing, Edgewood United Church, Kehillat Israel, Hazlitt Community Church, University Lutheran Church Earthkeeping Team, Fellowship for Tay, and the Presbyterian Church of Okemos. Let's give them a hand for helping to get the word out. These are organizations who are working on the climate issues that you may wish to connect to, depending upon your own location and interest. We will now get on to the reason that you've all carved out this time in your busy schedules to learn what we can do and what is being done here in Michigan to diminish the threats of climate change to both those of us currently able to inhale and exhale and those who have yet to join the community of life we share. Each speaker will talk for about 12 to 15 minutes, and after they've all spoken, we'll accept questions, which I'll moderate, switching between questions that come in live here in the room, as well as those that are coming in from those who are listening virtually. Our game plan is to be done by no later than 8:30. We regret to have no refreshments tonight, and it's the COVID thing that's keeping us from doing that. But we hope to be back to some sense of normalcy, whatever that looks like, before too much further. So let me introduce all three, and they'll speak in the order in which I introduce them. Dr. Missy Stoltz is a Sustainability Innovations Director for the city of Ann Arbor, one of the leaders in our state in moving forward climate action. In this role, she works with all city operations, residents, businesses, the University of Michigan itself, I'm sure a handful, nonprofits, and others to achieve a just transition to a community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030, as outlined in their A20 carbon neutrality plan. Prior to joining the city, Missy worked with cities and tribal communities around the nation to advance their climate and sustainability goals, including her time as climate director at ICLEI, which is the International Consortium of Local Environmental Initiatives, or something like that. I remember it from 20 years ago. They changed their name a little bit. For sustainability and a consultant to philanthropic organizations. Missy has a PhD in urban resilience. I didn't know such existed. What a thrill. I wish I was 20 years younger. From the University of Michigan, a master's in climate and society from Columbia University, an undergraduate degree in marine biology and environmental science from the University of New England. She will be followed by Annabelle Wilkinson, who's the environmental and climate justice specialist at the city of Grand Rapids. In this role, she supports the inclusion of climate change and climate environmental justice across Grand Rapids, city of Grand Rapids planning. Over the next couple of years, she'll lead the co-creation of the City of Grand Rapids Climate Action and Adaptation Plan alongside the community. Prior to joining the city, Annabelle worked on statewide urban planning projects across the sectors of housing, transportation, and climate adaptation, while at Michigan State University, where she earned a master's degree in urban and regional planning and a bachelor's degree from MSU. Finally, we'll be joined virtually by one of the state leaders, Kate Madigan, from Traverse City. Kate unfortunately broke her ankle recently, so it was best that she telecommute here via the internet, and so we're glad she's still able to do that. Kate has directed the Michigan Climate Action Network since 2015 when it was born, and she was at the helm then. Kate has helped lead coalitions to shut down Line 5 and the effort to prevent the state from allowing an oil tunnel, to get Traverse City to set the first community-wide 100% renewable energy goal in Michigan, and to organize the largest climate events in Michigan. Kate previously was a deputy policy director for the Michigan Environmental Council in Lansing and led a national safe food campaign based in Los Angeles for Environment America. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and the Environment and a master's degree from the School of International Training in Vermont after she studied and worked in Central and South America. Kate is native to Michigan with ties across the state. Her family's from Detroit and Flint. She now lives in Traverse City with her husband and 2 children. So let's welcome, first of all, Missy Stoltz.
Oh, have a blast. Did you hear that? That's the advice he gave me. I love it.
That was a nonviolent blast, by the way.
What
My peace
natural.
education center.
Yes, I love it. Hello, everybody. How are you? Okay, yeah, I might pop it up here. Hi, how's everybody doing? Yes, it's good to see you all in person. I am really excited to be with you all in real space and virtual space. I guess I'm talking to you in virtual space. Welcome into the space we are in. As Terry mentioned, and also thank you, Terry, for the invitation and the orchestration of all of us being here tonight. I have the privilege of working on climate action in Ann Arbor. And I'm not gonna share slides tonight. I have lots of them. I'm happy to circulate, but I kind of just wanted to have a little bit of a conversation with you. So there's kind of two journeys I'm gonna go on in the time I have. One is I wanna tell you a little bit about how I got to where I got in this role. And I wanna have a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of what it's really like to do this work. And then the other side is I want to tell you about E20 and what we're actually doing on the ground, because I think it's exciting. So first and foremost, I want to tell you that I am really lucky that I don't have a job. I have a life purpose. And I mean that. There is no world in which I'm not going to work on climate change, but I also wish that that weren't true. I wish that I could have kept on the career path that I started on, which is marine biology. But that wasn't an option for me in my undergrad when we took a course on environmental ethics, a required course in our program, and it happened to be on the ethics of climate change. And here I was sitting in this classroom thinking, everything I care about, every single thing, the people, the species that I wanted to study, the ecosystems that I love spending time in, are going to be impacted by climate change. And I felt the call, right? And so I knew I had to go into the field. And so I moved through. I was really, really lucky, very, very lucky to be in the right place at the right time in a lot of situations. I got to work on Plan YC, the very first aggressive sustainability plan that came out, sort of came up in this culture, and loved working with indigenous populations and local communities to help find climate solutions that made sense for them. And I got to work with Ann Arbor when I was in Boston, which is where ICLEI was headquartered at the time. And I just remember thinking, this is a beacon of hope. I grew up in the Midwest. I didn't really fit in the hometown. I grew up in northern Indiana. And I didn't see myself ever coming back. I didn't think that there was space for me, to be honest. And here was this progressive community that I was working with. And of course, like East Lansing and Lansing are extraordinary too. You just weren't members of our organization, so I couldn't celebrate you as much, but like, you're great. Focusing on this story, I was like, this is interesting. So time progresses and I get an opportunity to go to the private sector and work on creating new programs to help local governments do this work. And I thought, this would be fascinating. I'm going to try it. I'm in it 10 months. I'm terrible in the private sector is what I learned. Not going to be for me. But then I heard about this opportunity to work on something called the National Climate Assessment. Has anyone seen these? It's like the IPCC version of our analysis domestically. And they were requiring someone to have a PhD and to come in and help write the climate adaptation chapter. I thought, no, I don't want to, no, they're wrong. They don't need someone with a PhD. They need someone who knows what's happening on the ground. They need someone who is connected to all of these communities across the nation who are doing the actual work, and we need to highlight those stories. So I'm going to apply for that job. And I got it. They said, and you have to get a PhD. I was like, damn it. So it was at the University of Michigan. There we go. And slid into that role. And I actually created my own PhD because it didn't exist. So I did two, one in natural resources and one in urban planning. So I had to pass both of those and then move forward. But that's just stupid. That's not smart. Don't do that. The point of that story, though, is I worked while doing my PhD because I always wanted to stay deeply connected to practice. And I got super involved in Ann Arbor when I moved there because I'd known the people doing this work. And so within the first month, I met the mayor at an event and he put me on a board and a commission. So I got involved, joined a commission, was active, was helping, was in the climate community, and was loving it. And then the shine wore off because what I saw was a community who had done a lot of really great things a decade or so ago and had stopped. And I wasn't interested in that. So after I graduated, I was supposed to be in the Clinton climate office. Obviously that didn't pan out. So I worked with philanthropy, and then I got an invitation to lead Ann Arbor's office. And what I told them was no. And they said, why not? And I said, because I don't want to work for the most greenwashed place in the state of Michigan. And they said, you're hired. I said, I don't want this job. And they said, no, you're hired because we can't be that anymore. And I said, okay, if you're really serious, then every single day, my job is to challenge us to be better than that and be what we pretend that we are. And I share that because that's actually a lot of the work. I'm going to tell you about really cool things that we're doing, but the truth is, a lot of time, it's NIMBYism. A lot of time, it's people who want to go back in time. It's people who point and say, we have enough people, right? I wish that this was the Ann Arbor of the 80s. That's not going to happen, right? And so I want to add some reality kind of to the mix broadly. I'm not sure if that was all interesting to anybody, but the context of the work that we do is that it's terrible, awful, rotten, amazing, inspiring, phenomenal, transformative, and the hardest thing I've ever had to do every single minute of this work. And I wouldn't change it because there's no other option. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're actually doing and keep that context in the mind, because sometimes people are like, I wish we could be Ann Arbor. And I was like, no, you don't. Be where you are and challenge the systems where you sit, because you need to challenge them broadly. So in Ann Arbor, we passed a climate emergency declaration in 2019. And in passing that declaration, our council set the goal of carbon neutrality community-wide in a just and equitable way by 2030. Just like sit with that for a second, right? Absolutely audacious, aggressive, and I also say scientifically essential, right? So they passed that goal, and then they said, staff, you have until Earth Day 2020 to give us a plan for how we're going to achieve that. If you're doing the math in your head, that's 82 days. We had 82 days to create a plan to do something no one has ever done in a timeline that no one else had committed to by the time we were doing it. They also said, because I'm going to let you peek behind the mirror, no staff, no budget. That is not a lie. You can watch the recording. Like, they unanimously adopt it, and then one council member follows up and says, this is the requirement you have. Game on. So we form a coalition, we start sprinting, we produce a plan, we run 68 public events in those 82 days. If you're also thinking, a pandemic strikes in the midst of this, right? So we are deeply in the community creating this plan. And then it goes to council and we're all isolated, right? So it's this really interesting, also emotional labor that you're going through, where you sort of want to be surrounded by your community, but you can't in the moment that we're sort of birthing this plan. I will happily address questions if you have them. I will tell you that the plan was not an easy adoption. It was very political. We had to do a lot of adjustments, but in the end, the story we tell is on June 1st, technically June 2nd was 2 a.m. in the morning, but we say June 1st just for ease. Our city council unanimously adopted the plan. And what happened in that moment is we came with a budget, we came with staff, and we got it all through. Today, we are working on 35 actions that are in that plan. There are 44. I'm happy to talk to you about those actions, but I'm going to talk to you more broadly about the strategies. There are 7 strategies in A20 that are real no matter where you are. If you want to be carbon neutral, strategy 1, you've got to power your electrical system with 100% renewable energy. There's no option, right? You've got to do that. So we're working on, actually today, we hit 3 megawatts through a rooftop solar program we run called Solarize, where we help residents get solar at a discounted price. That's amazing. I mean, over $1 million in upfront savings for our residents to move forward with solar. It is wildly successful. We have worked on the largest landfill solar project in America. There's a lot happening in the solar industry right now. We plan to go to council on Monday night with that, but it has been put on ice for a few weeks while I don't know if anyone's following what's happening with the Department of Commerce and the investigation into solar panels, but there's an investigation into solar panels, which is an existential crisis for the solar industry right now. But that project will happen. That is a super exciting project because for those of you who've been to Ann Arbor, we don't have a lot of undeveloped land. This is the largest parcel we have to do solar. We also intervened in a rate case to make that the very first community solar offering for DTE. For us, we don't have consumers. They're not offering these community solar programs. So we had to go through a regulatory finding, get a judge to rule that this is what the program should look like. But we did. So we're working on that initiative. We are also proposed a sustainable energy utility, which is a municipal utility that is supplemental to an existing utility. We have a franchise with DT that is in perpetuity because of when we were formed. We can't negotiate. It's just what we have. I can't get money from the utility. I can't go to consumers and say, come in, we're done, right? That's what we've got to play. But the Michigan Constitution gives us the right to form a supplemental utility. So what if we form a utility that only focuses on solar and storage? We can. And we launched public comment to see if our public's interested. I just looked a few minutes ago. We already have 1,100 responses and they're tracking positive. So we'll see where that goes. So strategy 1, renewable energy. Strategy 2, beneficial electrification, right? We've got to switch over wherever it makes sense. We're running programs with Michigan Saves to help train contractors because we don't have enough trained labor to actually help make this transition. If anyone's tried recently, does anyone in here have a heat pump? Yes. How many HVAC installers did you have to talk to, Terry?
Oh, I think 7.
Yeah, 7 for those who didn't hear. That's just the reality. Right now, if you pick up the phone and you call an HVAC, the first you see, they're going to talk you out of a heat pump because they're not comfortable with the technology. So we worked with Michigan Saves to run it and create a training program that everyone in the state has access to, every contractor. And then you, as a customer, go into the Michigan Saves website and you actually see a badge for every contractor that's been trained to understand electrification, right? And so the idea is you got to get the market ready. Our electric rates are really high though. So just transitioning to electric by itself, well, we have an energy justice problem. So we're working on, of course, strategy 3, energy waste reduction. How do we make sure our homes, our businesses, our houses of worship are comfortable? They're safe, right? The best energy is the energy you never use. So we're running programs called Aging in Place Efficiently to help low-income seniors age in a place of their choosing by pairing energy improvements with aging improvements like grab bars and hydraulics and lighting and just levelizing stairs so we don't have trip hazards so people can stay in their home. We're working on expanding weatherization services so more people can get the help because a lot of people are too poor for weatherization. And that may mean they qualify, but if you have a hole in your roof or a hole in your wall, weatherization is not going to help you, right? So how do we change the system and kind of interrupt it? Those are the first 3 strategies. The 4th is around land use. How do we move within our community, right? So certainly we need to reduce the vehicle miles we travel in our single occupancy ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles. We have a goal of 50% reduction in the vehicle miles we travel. But if I'm going to get you to walk and bike or take transit, you have to be able to go somewhere walking and biking that you want to get to. It doesn't matter if the grocery store is still 5 miles away. You're going to drive. So how do we change our land use patterns? That right there, most contentious thing in our plan, land use. It almost tanked everything. True story. The 5th strategy is about materials, circular economy. How do we make sure that these devices and all of the things around us don't just get thrown away? Because there's no away, right? It's still in a landfill somewhere, most likely an environmental justice community, if we're really honest about it. But there is so much life in these products, not as a pen, but as something else. So how do we create local businesses that keep these materials in circulation? How do we minimize the amount of waste that we produce? So that's an area of emphasis for us as well, and a really exciting one. The 6th, climate change is already here. Climate change isn't just an issue of the future. So we need to be investing in the resilience of our people, our place, and our planet. So we have a slew of initiatives focused on things like emergency response, sure, but neighborhood social cohesion. Neighbors knowing neighbors is actually an incredible social fabric to help make sure that people can take care of each other. How do we create resilience hubs that are effectively community centers? Why not start with your existing community centers? They function every single day, but they also should function during a disaster. So we come in and we help make sure that they can do that. That might be energy and storage, that might be some stormwater features, you name it. The final strategy, strategy 7, is other, and it is a little bit of a cheat, but it's things like transparency and metrics and community engagement and equity, because those things don't belong in any single category. They belong in every single category, right? So that permeates all of what we do in the office. We are the largest office in the state of Michigan, and I've had to learn to not apologize for that. We are 11 people. That's great. And we have the most aggressive goal of everyone in the city in terms of what we're trying to do. We're less than 1% of the city budget, and that's just not enough. And so we continue to push for more people and more resources. And one thing that I am really nervous about, but also very excited, is in November, our public will have the chance to vote on a 20-year climate millage. It'll be 1 mil, roughly $7 million and growing over time, that will fund climate action. We'll see, right? We'll see if we're actually greenwashed or if this is part of the culture in Ann Arbor. I might need you to call me after the election, like pick me up off the floor. Either way, I'm probably going to be on the floor in like joy or like absolute despair, but we'll see. So that's just a little bit of what's going on in Ann Arbor. I hope I didn't bore you to tears. Can't wait for questions, but you're going to be super excited by Annabelle. Who's next? Thank you.
Next up is Annabelle Wilkinson. Let me hook you up here. And feel free to take
Thanks, Terry. All right. Take this mask off. Thank you so much, Terry. And thanks to the Greater Lansing United Nations Association for having all of us today. Again, my name is Ann Bolgensen. I'm just going to be giving you a little bit of rundown of kind of historically what Grand Rapids has done from a climate action perspective in the past, what we're currently doing, and what we're looking towards the future for. I'll identify some barriers that we faced and what folks can do to get involved. And this is a clicker. There we go. So I like to start off most of my presentations with the land acknowledgement. And here in East Lansing, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here on the beautiful ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe people, the people of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. We recognize the sovereignty of Michigan's indigenous nations and historic communities, both those who live here now and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. And we want to express gratitude and appreciation to the indigenous peoples across this continent who have been living and caring for this land from time immemorial, those who are still here and will always continue to be present. All right, so a little history on Grand Rapids and where we've come from a climate action perspective. Grand Rapids has a long history of being a leader in environmental sustainability and kind of tangentially climate change. Our sustainability journey started in 2005 through the leadership of Mayor George Hartwell. We were one of the first cities to adopt sustainability as a priority. So we implemented a 20% renewable energy goal, and we created the Community Sustainability Partnership, which was around 280 partner organizations coming together to support the triple bottom line approach and really imagine putting sustainability as a forefront for future generations. So in 2007, after we had exceeded that 20% renewable energy goal, we created a 100% renewable energy goal for municipal operations. And we were one of the first cities to offer free curbside single stream recycling for our residents in 2010. However, in 2013, we had a 100-year flood event in Grand Rapids. And so we needed to implement adaptation measures like $15 million in flood walls, as well as beginning the West Michigan Climate Resiliency Report. And we were one of the first and only cities to successfully separate our sewer and stormwater. Through our Mayor's Greening Initiative, we've planted over 9,000 trees. And we have also created, with partnership with the U.S. Green Building Council of West Michigan, our Grand Rapids 2030 district, which is a private-public partnership that really works on high-performing buildings and green mobility options to lower our carbon footprint in Grand Rapids. You're gonna have to bear with me on the clicks. This thing is a little slow. So in more recent history, our city adopted a strategic plan that really had sustainability as one of its core 6 values. And we've also made sure that our climate mitigation and adaptation are a key feature of our city's legislative priority agenda for when we're going to lobby. Now, some of the community initiatives that we're looking at are prioritizing environmental and climate justice in all of our work. The city is just 2 members of a leadership team of 23 on a community group called the Community Collaboration on Climate Change. And that is a group that has a vision that Black, Indigenous, and people of color and historically white environmental organizations will dismantle extractive systems and build new systems that are centered in human well-being, the interconnectedness of life, and access to shared leadership. Now, the C4's objective is to create a climate justice movement in the city of Grand Rapids and prioritizing the lived experience of our communities of color. And we're also working with community partners on equitably decarbonizing our building sector, and that's through our EH0 initiative. And it's a long title. It's Grand Rapids Policies and Programs for Equitable, Healthy, and Zero Carbon Buildings. You see why we needed a little shortening there. And essentially what we're looking to do with that program is co-create with community policies and programs to equitably decarbonize our residential and commercial buildings and present those policies to commission for consideration and hopeful adoption. And one other thing that we also have that we're very proud of is our municipal carbon emissions. The city now has a goal for city operations to be carbon neutral by 2040. And we're on track to cut our city's greenhouse gas emissions 47% below 2008 levels by 2025. We're committed to determining with community stakeholders if the city should establish a community-wide goal, and if yes, what that goal should be by October. And that's been through some very informative grassroots movements from our residents. So what we're looking at currently is that the C4, that community group, is working with the city to ensure, elevate, and integrate that environmental justice and climate justice is integrated into our community master planning process, as well as co-creating a community climate action adaptation plan with the city. So we're in the process of completing a community-wide carbon emissions inventory, continuing to search for pathways to install solar on other city properties, including our landfill, our Butterworth landfill. It's an endless process. Incorporating climate justice into our regional hazard mitigation plan. And as we enter our next fiscal year, we'll be completing a climate vulnerability assessment for our community, as well as beginning engagement with our climate action adaptation plan in the hopes of finishing in the summer of 2023. It's a long way there, but we're working on it. So some of our barriers that we're kind of running into here are fairly basic, and a lot of things that Missy mentioned already. You know, without funding, it'd be hard to implement climate actions locally. With a staff of 3, we don't have capacity to tackle every aspect of climate change. And there are local limitations for what we can pass from a policy perspective. You know, we don't have control over our transportation sector. And in terms of our building energy codes, we can really only enforce what is available at the state level. Also in Grand Rapids, as Missy discussed, we also have an investor-owned utility, which presents a major challenge to achieving our 100% renewable energy goal. And also as we're working towards community-wide carbon neutrality. And so that we are a customer of Consumers Energy. Absolutely. And so a lot of where the city's energy come from cannot be regulated locally. Only federal or state policy can do that. And so while Consumers Energy does have a net zero carbon emissions by 2040 goal, and they are looking to retire all of their coal by 2025, the city has a far more aggressive goal when it comes to renewable energy. And we're currently installing a 1 megawatt ground mounted behind the meter solar array at our Lake Michigan filtration plant out in Grand Haven. And we continue to work with stakeholders, including consumers, to try to keep building other options for solar arrays. But the city has evaluated 6 other properties for solar installation. And while each one has shown the ability to generate a valuable amount of solar energy, due to consumers' distributed generation rate, it's just not financially viable. So that's a big barrier. And generally speaking, residents overall, there's a lack of engagement on climate change. You know, Grand Rapids is a fairly progressive city. We have a large community of color. We're around 40% communities of color. But we're in a very conservative metropolitan area that can be rural. And climate change has turned into a bit of a polarizing topic. I don't know if all of you knew that. Very politicized in the news. However, studies from the Yale program on climate change communication show that despite the polarization happening, almost 72% of people agree that it is happening. And yet, despite our best intentions, we just don't talk about it. Only 35% of adults say they discuss global warming at least occasionally. That's a big issue. We got to keep talking about it. And that's why I'm so grateful for these opportunities. I'd say another systemic issue that we see is white supremacy also remains a barrier. As those most impacted by climate change will be those who contributed least to the issue due to increased exposure to climate hazards, higher sensitivities, and a lower adaptive capacity. So that includes women and low-income populations globally, Indigenous peoples, Black and Brown communities in the US that may reside in flood zones without green space and potentially near toxic industrial sites due to the racist policies of redlining. And communities of color have been shouting their lived experiences for years of environmental injustice. And white-dominated organizations need to hear them and address historically racist policies and practices in order to not exacerbate already current inequities with our climate solutions. And lastly, eco-anxiety. How many of y'all feel that? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's hard when we encounter such big problems to know what to do. After all, we're only one person, and all the scary data can lead to feelings of helplessness and fear, anxiety, and not knowing what to do can make people disassociate, and it's a defense mechanism. People reject it even more, but thankfully there are some things we can do. So we can have a conversation. You'll be happy to know that most people are at least open to having it. Again, the Yale program on climate change communication say that around 91% of people are open to having that conversation. So it's worth taking that risk. The best messenger for climate change is all of you. To people to people you trust, people who hold the same values. You can start using your voices to talk about why this matters to you, and most of all, why this matters to your community. And take a second to ask yourself, how do I connect with people? We're all a part of something bigger than us, a church, an organization, a school. Start there, have your conversations. But I will say, something I kind of think about a lot is, I don't think of the goal of having conversations on climate change is to tell people about it. It's really just to open the door and have a conversation and listen. Practice talking about what you care about, and then also hear what other people care about as well. And that's how you're going to make that connection and connect the dots between what they care about, what they value, and how that connects to climate change. Whether that's, you're a parent and you want to talk about your children's futures together, or whether that's you like beer and hops and through the growing cycles of grapes and hops, how that's going to be affected by climate change. You can really draw all the lines anywhere you want. But the last inspire, how can we work together to tackle this problem in a way that's compatible with our values? You want to stay positive, and you want to really share solutions, and that's what's going to make people feel empowered. Oh. So a couple other things, join a movement. Sorry, I hit the button a little too quickly there. Whether that's just global or local, anything really helps. Individuals who gather together and share ideals, they create a movement together. And there are many great organizations to choose from. I know Kate is going to say a lot about that, so I think that's a good segue. But if you don't have one locally, I'd encourage you to make your own. As I mentioned before in Grand Rapids, I think that the folks that we had from the Grand Rapids Crisis Coalition really helped move the needle politically in terms of what was being done and what was being prioritized. And from the city, objectively, I think that's very true. And so I think that joining together in a movement, you never know what's going to happen. And lastly, embrace systems change. Individually, our carbon footprints are pretty minimal. And with the understanding that 1/3 of the global emissions come from 20 largest fossil fuel companies. That's a big thing to tackle that, yes, one individual change on your part may not address. So organizing against larger systems and lifting up the voices of communities of color when you're creating those system-wide solutions can really help us address climate change faster and more equitably. And now I'm going to pass it on to Kate. Thanks all.
Kate, can you hear us?
Can.
Okay. Kate would have been here except for some unfortunate adventure with a dog toy, I heard. It caused her to trip and fall and break her ankle, and we hope that she's repairing herself. First of all, I guess I hope that story is true because I just said it publicly. If it's not,
better story.
I won't tell you who told me. Anyway, it's so good to have you here. She's been one of the leaders of climate action in Michigan for some time. So take it away, Kate.
Thank you so much, Terry. And thank you so much for having me here tonight. I really wish that I could be there in person so much. But yes, I broke my ankle a week ago, Sunday. And then this Sunday, my youngest came down with COVID, our first experience with COVID. So there are lots of reasons why I can't be there in person today, but I'm so happy to join you via Zoom today. So I am Kate Madigan. I'm director of the Michigan Climate Action Network, or MyCAN. And we are a network of 76 organizations and over 40,000 individuals now. And we have a small but mighty team of staff based around the state. And I am based in Traverse City. And Dr. Missy Stultz happens to be, we're lucky enough to have her on our steering committee as well. So just to give you a little bit of more information about MyCAN, we started in 2015. I'm pretty sure, Terry, you were at the first meeting when we came together. And at that time, not a lot of people were talking about climate change at all in Michigan. It was still pretty controversial. So we have come a long way. We have a long way to go. But what we came together to do, in a nutshell, in summary, is to build a more powerful climate and justice movement. And that includes engaging people to take action and connecting our network, elevating climate to be a top issue in our state and continuing to keep it elevated and to keep shining a spotlight on this important work and news. And then advancing bold and equitable solutions and policies, including supporting local climate action. So here you can see a couple of examples of our work. That was at the picture below was at our first Climate Action Summit held in Grand Rapids in 2019. And then I have a screenshot of our most recent action where we were able to get over 900 people to send in comment. I think official public comment, we only got 825, but on the healthy climate plan, the draft healthy climate plan, calling for it to be stronger. And the state got about 2,000 comments. So we were excited to contribute to make sure people's voices were heard in that. And then going the wrong way, here we go. We've also been involved in local climate goals, doing some local organizing. And since I'm based in Traverse City, we are most involved in Traverse City. We were inspired by hearing about the cities who had set 100% renewable energy goals around the country. The Sierra Club in particular was doing a lot of organizing around to set these bold goals that not only that showed it was possible and necessary. At the time when we started talking about 100% renewable energy, people, even, allies were, skeptical that we really could do that. We did, and we were also inspired by Grand Rapids, who, as you just heard, had the first municipal 100% renewable energy goal, I believe, in the state. And so one of the things that we did is we brought in former Mayor Hartwell, who's an inspiring speaker, to come up to Traverse City. And he really helped convey that this is important and possible. The top picture, the first thing we did, though, was solar energy at the time. And I mean, it feels like I'm talking about 40 years ago, but it was kind of controversial in Traverse City. people felt like it was political. So we got together and fundraised and put solar panels on a local school. And then we had a ribbon cutting ceremony, and local leaders, the utility leaders were there, city officials were there, and it really kind of helped put a more positive feel onto renewable energy in the community. And then we started meeting with all of the city commissioners and talking about passing a 100% renewable energy goal. That's when we brought in former Mayor Hartwell, and within a year, the city commission passed a goal for municipal operations. The goal was to get to 100% renewable energy by 2020, so in less than 4 years. Then we set our sights on community-wide goal, meaning in addition to city operations, all of the homes and businesses' electricity would be powered with 100% renewable energy. And by summer of 2018, Traverse City Light and Power passed a policy. So Traverse City Light and Power is the municipally owned utility in Traverse City, and passed a 100% renewable goal by 2040 and an interim goal to get to 40% by 2025. I'm gonna remember which direction to go eventually. And so the point I really want to make is that these goals, as you heard, from Missy and Annabelle's presentations, these goals really do get results. And within a year, less than a year of the first goal, Traverse City built a megawatt of local solar in Traverse City. Now there's, I think, 2, maybe more megawatts, and more is going to be built on that site. Traverse City achieved its 100% renewable energy goal for city operations by 2020. And then Traverse City Light and Power, I just heard the new director say, met its 40% by 2025 goal already. And Traverse City Light and Power went from, when we started, I think they had about 12% renewables, and now they're at 43%. And I ran the calculations, and it's that's about 100,000 metric tons of CO2 every year. So one of the other things that we, as the Michigan Climate Action Network, really wanted to do was to take the work, the goal in Traverse City, and to get it out there as widely as possible, to get a lot of media attention to it, because there's this kind of contagion that happens. It's been actually scientifically proven, I believe, that if your neighbors have solar panels on their rooftops, you're more likely to put solar on your rooftop. Same with electric vehicles, same with communities. So right now there are over 200 US cities that have 100% renewable energy goals, and more than 50 are now powered by 100% renewable energy. And more are now moving to more ambitious goals, with having carbon neutrality goals, like the city of Ann Arbor we just heard about. So this year, there have been so many goals happening in Michigan that we wanted to get a sense of how many were out there and which communities were setting these goals. So we had an intern this fall, Grace Style, and we worked to compile a list of all of the community goals in Michigan. And we found that at least 17 Michigan communities have set ambitious climate goals. And we set the bar at either they have a goal for carbon neutrality or 100% renewable energy. And on our website, you can read the report we put together, and there's also an interactive map, so you can look at the communities there. And here are the communities. And I have to admit, we missed Royal Oak. In our report, it says 16 communities, and Royal Oak reached out to us right away and was like, you need to add us. So there are at least 17. There may be more out there. But we also list each of the goals and have links to each of the communities. And so I just think it's so inspiring that so many communities in Michigan are doing this work. And just as Traverse City was inspired by Grand Rapids, I know a lot of other communities are. I know that Ann Arbor was the first community in Michigan to set a carbon neutrality goal. And as you can see, inspired a lot of those goals as well. And then we also, there are many other communities doing work to move to more renewable energy, to decarbonize. And so we have a list of honorable mentions as well. Every community is unique and is approaching this work in a different way, has a different political makeup, has different resources. There's a lot of really good work happening in our state. And we also, we also released this report and used it to show that there's really a need for a strong statewide policy to move toward the governor's statewide carbon neutrality goal, which the final plan, which was released last week. And so in the report, we highlighted 4 different communities, and one of the communities that I also want to mention is Highland Park, because as every community is very unique, as I said, and has different reasons for wanting to do this work. All of us are motivated by climate change, but there are a lot of other reasons why communities are moving toward these goals. So Highland Park's story is really inspiring. To summarize it really briefly, there was a lot of auto industry in Highland Park. It's a city really close to Detroit. And over the decades, the auto industry left, taking with it a lot of jobs and a lot of tax investment. And in 2011, the city owed DTE, I think it was $4 million in electric bills. So the streetlights in Highland Park were removed and the city was left in the dark. So a local group, Solidarity, started, and they started installing solar-powered streetlights. And that work continued to grow. In 2019, they created a community-led plan, a blueprint for energy democracy. And then they created a plan for how they will get to 100% not only renewable energy, but locally owned energy, because they're motivated by addressing the intersecting crisis related to energy, climate change and energy poverty and pollution and energy shutoffs and a lot of different problems that need to be addressed. Oops. And so Annabelle and Missy really did a great job talking about some of the barriers. And some things that jumped out at us in this research and in our work is, a lack of resources and staff to create and implement policies. Also, even though renewable energy efficiency are the cheapest forms of energy now, to move rapidly to new off of fossil fuels is going to take a lot of investments in clean energy infrastructure. Lack of control over, a lot of communities don't have control over their energy supply. The Traverse City example I shared does. There are some communities with city-owned utilities. Most communities get their energy from DTE and consumers, investor-owned utilities whose main priority is to benefit their shareholders, which sometimes conflicts with the interests of communities and with the needs of addressing the climate crisis. We need policies, we need statewide policies so that we can give communities the tools that they need to meet these goals, like community solar and lifting there's a 1% cap on distributed renewable energy. There are policies like community choice aggregation that other states have passed that give communities a lot more tools that has not been passed in policy here in Michigan. Ann Arbor, Missy has come up with, the innovative idea of the SEU, which gets around that in a brilliant way. And then we need stronger renewable energy standards. We need to be moving statewide in all of these directions as well. And it's important to point out that the large utilities are also lobbying against a lot of these efforts at the state level to increase access to distributed renewables energy and to pass these important clean energy policies. So the solutions, I mean, there are a lot of solutions that we've seen today, but to address these barriers, cities, as you heard about Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor, cities are finding innovative ways to meet these goals and to overcome these barriers. And also elections matter, both at the local level. The reason we started doing this work in Traverse City is because at the time we did is because there was a shift. We shifted to a pro-climate majority on the city commission and then on the Traverse City Light and Power Board. And then also, so getting involved, we're in an election year and I'm a 501c3 organization, so we don't endorse, but we get involved. Getting out the vote is really important to do. And getting involved in whatever way you're moved to get involved. And that is all. Thank you. And I really enjoyed listening to Missy's and Annabelle's presentations, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Annabelle, and thank you, Missy. So, the intention of pulling this program together was to help us who are concerned with climate change, how we can be effective change agents at the community level. And especially as Kate mentioned here in the last part, this is an election year, and clearly who's in office matters. But I want to ask the first question of all three. Oh, we got to figure out how to hand out we got the other microphone.
What's that?
We have the other portable microphone that we can use.
Oh, yeah.
There it is. Yeah. Okay, great. So we'll do. I want to ask the first question to each of the speakers, if they're willing to. How do you think the best approach to elected officials now to get their attention that this is actually a climate emergency and needs to be addressed? We'll start with Missy and go to Annabelle, and then we'll go to Kate, and then I'll take some questions from the audience.
I'm sorry to have my back.
Actually, it will be better to answer from there because.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
No, it's fine. I'm just gonna hold it. Okay. I'm sorry to go first on this one. Here's what I know. That elected leaders, especially at the local level and even kind of regional level, don't actually get a lot of feedback. And when they get feedback, it's mostly don't do. Rarely do they hear from people that say, we like the work that you're doing, we see you. And an email is effective, a phone call is far more effective. If you pick up the phone and you call an elected leader and tell them what matters to you, it resonates very, very frequently. That's true for your congressperson, our senators, but it's also true for your council representatives. And don't take for granted that they're hearing from people. It's sort of our responsibility to let them know what we think. And then the other thing I often tell people is if you don't like who's on the ballot, run. I mean, honestly, who are we waiting for? If it's not us, I mean, if they don't exist, it's you.
All right, so from Grand Rapids perspective, some feedback we've always heard from folks is that from a commission perspective, when folks are coming to commission meetings to voice their opinions, if it's just a group of 4 or 5, you might be written off. If you have a larger movement that is greater in numbers and consistency, that is something that they have to pay attention to. And to continue having those in-person meetings with commissioners, making those phone calls, making sure that depending on what type of government you have, if it is city manager run, that you are getting in front of the city manager to understand his priorities or their priorities, excuse me, speaking from Grand Rapids perspective here, and how you can really implement those. And from a senator and House of Representatives perspective, yes, always keep writing, keep them in the know that people have their eye on this. But something that I found is slightly more effective when you are sending in information, I know this happens with me with Peter Meyer, is looking up what tangentially related value is of his that you can then add into whatever text that you're provided from another organization, to really layer it in so that he can't ignore it. It's something that he's really supported, something that's important to them.
Yeah, and those are both great answers. And I will just add that I used to lobby for environmental group for MEC in Lansing, and it is so, if you can reach people when they're running for office, when they're a candidate, they have a lot more time, and they're it's a lot easier to build a relationship then. So start now, start soon to reach out and get to know your representatives. I think also connecting, making sure to try to, it's so obvious, it's so simple, maybe you all know this, but it's just really important to try to learn something about them and try to make a personal connection. It's a relationship, and getting them, liking them and getting them to like you is half the battle. Also making sure to listen, because we have so much to say about climate change, but making sure to listen is really important. If you can find out really valuable information, and then you can come responses to their concerns. And I think finally, going back to what Annabelle was talking about with the Yale Climate Communications, is speaking from the heart, talking about why climate change is important to you. It's more effective than talking about facts, is talking about why personally you care, what your concerns are.
Thank you, Kate. Is there a question here before we switch to the folks online? If you'll put your questions in the chat, we'll go through them and offer them up. But is there anyone here that has a question? Raise the hand and I'll bring the mic over to you so you can ask the question. Okay. I'll hold this for you.
Oh, thanks. I'm wondering if there is a movement toward all these municipalities who have goals to move together toward pressuring state and even national government officials toward better climate action policies.
Kate, you want to try that first, and then I'll see if Missy and Annabelle want to join.
Sure. Yes. I think there has been some work. Missy and Annabelle might know better than I do, but I know that some groups have worked to get mayors and other city officials to sign on to letters, to do some advocating of their own, and they're really, really effective messengers. And then there are also other kind of consortiums of mayors and cities that I'm not as familiar with, and Missy's going to take it away. But it's a great point that this is a powerful group to be pushing forward policy.
Yeah, local governments are highly connected, and I'll take that from two levels. One, in the state, it may surprise you, but when I go to Lansing, people don't listen to Ann Arbor. So we are effective. So we have to work with lots of other municipalities and often do some of the behind the scenes research, the technical work that's necessary. So Monroe comes forward and actually speaks on an issue as opposed to us. From a national perspective, I'm really excited about a lot of the things that are happening. We're part, both Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor, of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And so we're meeting regularly with different folks from the federal administration, but we're also working on the side on an initiative around, we call it reform. It's renewable energy, energy efficiency, electrification, and equity movement. And it's about 10 vanguard cities. You're not going to be surprised. Boulder, Berkeley, Ann Arbor. That's right, Ann Arbor. We're in there, but we're organizing to figure out how you do all of those things: energy efficiency, beneficial electrification, and renewable energy, workforce development, intergenerational wealth at one time instead of one piece. And we've got the eye of the White House. So they are helping us organize to figure out how we transform the entire landscape. We got a lot of work to do, but we're not going to do it if we don't try.
I'm just, if I could follow up on that to any of you, is there any work going on, like with the Michigan Association of Counties or the Michigan Townships Association, the Michigan Municipal League? Are those entities that play a role in any of this, and are they playing a good role? Anybody want to try that?
They're playing a role. Tangentially. So they're involved in Michigan Green Communities, which is an initiative to help communities across the state come into climate work, wherever that might be, and sustainability work broadly. So I think that that's certainly a gateway in. We'll stop there. Yeah.
I just made that question up, and then I look up and I see John Sarver just asked the same question. What a great mind you have, John. Other questions on the that I've missed there? What are the chances for lifting the 1% cap?
That's a Kate.
That's a Kate question.
Yeah, I mean, we thought it would be, it seems like a no-brainer, right? That there's this arbitrary 1% cap, and we should be able to get rid of that, or at least increase it to like 1.5%, 2%. But it became really challenging. So I believe we're going to try again. I have to say it hasn't been something that I've been briefed on in a while. So, but I think, it's something that we need to regroup and we need to get it over the finish line. And it's a big priority for all the groups in Michigan. It has been for years. So we're going to get it done. It's just frustrating. And it's the power of the big utilities once again that is preventing that from happening.
Power of the utilities. Ooh. Okay, Terry has another question. Terry has too many questions and not many answers. So I got people here that might be able to answer them. One of my concerns that doesn't seem to be addressed in the climate conversations very much, that I wonder if any of the three of you are aware of things that are going on. The notion of we see the incredible destruction right now in Ukraine from war, and the destruction of all that infrastructure that at some point will be rebuilt. And in that infrastructure that's being destroyed, not just in Ukraine, but that's the more visible one that we see, of course, is an incredible amount of embodied energy. And I'm not aware of much going on that addresses the design. We talk about how the buildings perform afterwards and lead to some extent, and their assessment puts in things that have something to do with embodied energy in the construction process. But I don't see much talk about that. And yet when we build buildings in Europe that are still being used 500 years later, enlighten me on where you think there might be some room for what's going on with people doing embodied energy kinds of analysis. Anybody want to tackle that?
I have something to say. It's not
that's
too helpful. So the Rocky Mountain Institute, now known as RMI, is just about to start in an embodied carbon 4-part series that looks at it from a climate action planning perspective. So I would recommend reaching out to that resource.
Yeah, so we passed a resolution on embodied carbon to educate developers on embodied carbon and the role it has in greenhouse gas emissions. But Annabelle mentioned we don't have control over building codes in the state, so we can't mandate that people do certain things. But the 2030 district for us, the Ann Arbor 2030 district, is one of our collaborators on our A20 work. We have about 110 organizations that work with us. They actually run a monthly lunch and learn series for developers, for architects, for engineers. And this has been a huge point of education for folk. And we joined an RMI cohort to try to figure out how we capture embodied carbon in our greenhouse gas calculations in the city. We joined this morning, so it's hot off the presses.
Next question is for you. Will the SEU be up and running in Ann Arbor?
John Sarver, that's mean. He knows the answer. No, he doesn't know the answer. The SEU, the sustainable energy utility that we're exploring, actually went out for public comment last week. We're getting public comment and public interest in the concept until June 30th. I mentioned this, I looked earlier, and we have over 1,000 folks already giving us feedback on the concept. If that feedback is positive, which it is, but it's early adopters who've taken it first, we will then go to council in August with a recommendation on governance and staffing for that utility and a potential enabling legislation, which is the only legal thing we have to do to form it, which means, John, we could technically be up operational and installing solar early 2023.
Question. Okay. I can give a definition, Terry's definition of embodied energy. I am not a scientist. I don't pretend to be. Embodied energy is the amount of energy that goes into produce something and it's in the product. So, for example, these walls here are made out of not simply, you wouldn't just measure the amount of energy it takes to produce those bricks, those blocks, but the transportation that's involved in it as well. You'd measure it from cradle to cradle, in a sense, measuring all the energy that goes into it. If we're looking at how energy is used in the world, the embodied energy is a significant portion that we typically do not look at when we're looking at construction. This is where the building codes are particularly effective, or could be. So that's Terry's rough definition. Anybody want to improve on that? Would be easy to do. Okay, and then there was a question that was really more about the codes that you were asking. Say your question again.
I asked more about materials, like cement. It's long term, it's good, but it generates a lot of CO2. And wood, you say, oh, it's natural, but it's going away as long as that.
There's some work going on in MSU right now in the program that Annabelle graduated with called Domicology, that's looking at the end of life buildings and the reutilization of those materials. Matter of fact, Rex Lamore, who runs that program, made a suggestion a number of years ago, trying to suggest that when a developer decides they're going to build a new building or complex, that they have to put some money aside at the front end to be able to do the deconstruction. And the stuff has, if you're using things that could not be reutilized again, there could be an extra charge that you'd have to put into there, because that's, in a sense, picking up the burden that you're actually transferring onto a later generation. But again, using the concrete blocks that are here, if these are made in your own backyard from materials that are right there, that's one measure of the embodied energy. But if you're moving them all the way across the country on a truck, that's a whole nother level that moves up there. And so the analysis that goes with what's appropriate in which location makes it a little bit more challenging to decide what the right material is. But LEED addresses to some extent some of those things, but I don't think, in my mind, comprehensively. But I'm not supposed to be up here. Somebody else is supposed to be. Questions? How many people here, and maybe a show of hands on the Zoom, think that we are actually in what is, maybe for lack of a better phrase, a climate emergency? Everybody in the room and most of the people up there. That kind of tells us that the people that aren't here, for many reasons, there are other people who think it's a climate emergency, but how do we get people to consider that this might be a climate emergency? Do they have to have a disaster in their own backyard? Anybody want to tackle that? Feeling lonely up here. Please help me. Oh, we got somebody's got their hand up. God bless you. That's all right. Take the mic away from
I
me. will you?
I think a lot of people recognize that there is a climate emergency, but have a hard time finding a way in, so it's not so overwhelming and completely hopeless, right? So the education tonight I find really empowering, and I think sometimes education doesn't get the full bill of its worth, right? We want to make sure that our styrofoam cups are being recycled after coffee hour, or even better yet, bring a coffee mug from home. But that seems like we're chipping away at this mountain, whereas recognizing what is being done in local communities is actually so empowering. And to see the two communities, one that I live in and one where my church is, on that list, I'm like, oh, things are happening. Like this, we can have, this is an emergency, but it's not impossible to make a difference. So that was not an answer to your question, but
It was a damn fine thought, I might say, if I'm allowed to pass judgment, which I probably shouldn't. On second thought, do we really have to show this on, do we have to show this recording on the internet when we're done? Kate, were you trying to say something?
Well, I just wanted to reflect on her comment. I mean, what really jumps out for me is continuing to lift up hope and looking at where we've had success and where solutions are happening. Big, bold solutions are underway. I think that's important because we all need hope in this climate emergency to keep going.
Yeah, I sent off a very pessimistic article this morning that was on Tom Dispatch yesterday, I think. Tom Englehart's the editor of that blog post. And it is really, really dark. And somebody who's on one of my mailing lists who hasn't responded to anything in, well more than a decade, wrote to me about how depressed he was after reading that, for which again, I felt horribly bad, but then I had to give him some line of hope. So I steal the Rebecca Solnit quote about hope is not a lottery ticket you sit on the sofa feeling lucky. It's an axe you use to break down doors in emergency. And I added to that really the true joy in life, the Bernard Shaw quote, is throwing yourself into a purpose, as these folks that you've heard tonight have done with climate change, that's bigger than yourself. It's where you find relationships that are worth keeping for the rest of your life. So, those of you looking to get active who are not active, if we can help you connect with the group that's closest to you, either through the Michigan Climate Action Network in your own backyard, or the local groups that are working in A20 or Grand Rapids, we're glad to be able to do that. Annabelle wants to add something here.
Just one thing to add to your question, Terry, is that you're asking how to really get additional people into thinking it's a climate emergency. It's really like it's a gradual step process into having those conversations, right? Like I think about what you said, and I think about my brother, who I would label as completely disengaged. He's like, 20. And he's in college. And so I was really thinking, I talked to him one time and I said, talking about climate change naturally, because that's my job. And he looked at me, he's like, Annabelle, I really don't want to talk about politics right now. And I was like, oh, okay. That's not kind of what I expected. And as I was kind of thinking about it and sitting with it and really thinking about him in particular, I really identified that one of his core values was innovation. That's just something that he would really talk about for hours. And he just got an internship at Ford. So really sitting down with him to talk about electric vehicles, and he's really excited by them, really interested in what the new F-150 looks like. And that's like a small gateway to beginning that conversation and opening that door for him. And I know another one of his things is fiscal responsibility. So looking at, from a climate action perspective, what's going to save him money as he buys a house, energy efficiency, they're all building blocks to making him understand just how important this is.
Cheat and just grab this. I see you, David. One of the things that I was so impressed with when the mayor brought forward the millage in Ann Arbor, he talked about fiscal responsibility. And what he said is, we are all going to pay the price of climate change. We're all paying it. We're going to pay it in impacts and damages and losses, or we're going to make an investment in our future. It's our choice what to do. And it was one of the most moving ways I've heard it framed before. And I think it's real, right? We are going to pay the price of climate change because we have not acted fast enough. Our job today is to manage the unavoidable by adapting and avoid the unmanageable by doing every single thing that we can do to mitigate. So just offering that perspective.
And one other thing I want to add, and then we will move on, that I find really helpful is there's social science research, Erica Chenoweth, that found that looked at all of the social movements throughout history and found that what you need to achieve major social change is 3 or 3.5% of the population activated. You also need, a permissive majority, so most people kind of not really opposing what you want to do. But so to get major changes happening, you just need, it's a doable number, I think. And I also see it happening. Like, we have a governor who's for carbon neutrality that's making it happen. We have a president who's doing that. We have all of these communities. It's just there are certain people in certain positions of power that are preventing things from happening. So it's a strategic thing as well. It's restoring our democracy as well. That's not super healthy right now.
We have a hand from David Arnosti. So can unmute yourself, David, and
Sure.
ask your question.
Thank you very much for taking my question. This weekend, the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light Capital Area chapter dedicated a new solar array at a community center in South Lansing. Our group of some 10 houses of worship worked together to fundraise for this, and their community center will now have clean, renewable electricity to support their programs and be a demonstration. So my question is, in Grand Rapids, in Ann Arbor, Traverse City, has there been outreach and engagement of local houses of worship in these climate justice topics? This is a natural constituency, and we're aware of particular activities, but I wonder more broadly, is there an impact, and has there been good synergy here?
Yes. So the model that is used by Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, where houses of worship are able to move together, the congregants, the constituents fund solar, actually came out of Ann Arbor. So we partnered with Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, brought in an attorney a few years ago, won a grant, and we helped kind of create that model. So we continue to promote it within the city. And then in our collaborators network, we have multiple houses of worship that we work with. And I'm going to use that as sort of a branch to say, our collaborators network is about working with networks, trusted stakeholders. Houses of worships are really important stakeholders. They're trusted, right? And this idea of stewardship is really dominant. But other collaborators that we have are landlords, our affordable housing colleagues, because sustainability and affordable housing should go hand in hand if we think about having access and people in our community. And so it's a broad network, but the short answer is yes, and we have a lot more work and opportunity to do in that space.
Yes, we've had faith representation on our energy advisory committee that really drove the city in its municipal emission goals. I think that there's a lot more work to do in engaging with the faith community as we enter the climate action and adaptation plan. But I think with our strong foundation, that's something to look forward to.
And I'll add, in Traverse City, a lot of the early organizing work involved houses of worship, and the George Hartwell came and spoke at a Methodist church to 200 people, and we got a number of churches to sign on to our work early on. Right now it's kind of in the implementation phase. It's mostly, a lot of the work is happening at the Light and Power board level, because they're keep it moving in the right direction.
So for the For Gail's question in the chat, does anyone know whether a local climate disaster actually inspires affected communities to pass climate policies addressing reducing emissions or resiliency? Are they more likely to take climate change seriously than unaffected communities? I do think that that's true. Something that I mentioned in my presentation was that in 2013, the city of Grand Rapids did have a 100-year flood event that flooded the Grand River and a lot of the downtown areas. And that proceeded to pass an investment of $15 million into flood walls and to take a serious look at climate resiliency in our community. I will say that I think that something that does happen potentially in Midwestern cities is that if people's attention is fleeting. So, something to keep in mind is that it needs to happen with like diligence and immediacy and making sure that you're continually bringing this to the forefront until something's addressed.
There's actual research on this too. It's called this disaster window of opportunity that emerges for communities, but they can only use that window if they're prepared to use that window or more mobilized. Otherwise, the natural desire is to go back as fast as you can to what you had before.
There's another question that came in from Margaret. Are there organizations working on climate action, collaborating with organizations concerned with militarism and or racism? And I know, Annabelle, you're specifically dealing as climate justice person with some of that, but at least the racism part. If any of you can speak to either of those pieces to Margaret.
So I'd say a main portion of our participation in the Community Collaboration on Climate Change, or C4 group, is focused on addressing racism in our community and addressing that while considering climate change, essentially climate justice. So what we've been doing is really intentionally, when we're creating our bylaws, ensuring that we have stipulations that say that there need to be an overrepresentation of people of color on our committee. So I think right now we have, out of 23 people, 65% are people of color on our leadership team. And that when we're creating our fiduciaries, that we're selecting organizations of color who will benefit from being able to have that grant experience so that they can further grow in their missions. I think that there's a long way to go, but this is something that we've been very focused on, taking anti-racism courses together as a leadership team, equity trainings as well. And that's what we're hoping to do in terms of co-creating that climate action adaptation plan, is really having the C4 help our communities of color decide what they prioritize in that plan. And just like Missy mentioned, like that may be affordable housing and energy justice. These are more specific topics that directly relate to climate change and capacity to adapt to climate change that might not be considered from a traditional white environmental perspective as the highest priority, but for our communities of color it is. So making sure that their voices are heard, and from a planning perspective, prioritizing them from a targeted universalism way.
I guess, Kate, do you know of statewide organizations at the intersection?
Yes. So this is a really big priority, is to focus in on climate change is not affecting all of us equally. It's very disparate, and it's affecting BIPOC communities and lower income communities more around the world. And so for so many reasons, that's really important that we are focusing on justice in all of our climate work, and in partnering with and centering the work of justice-led organizations, BIPOC-led organizations. So some of the work that we're doing is there's a coalition that formed in the past couple of years called Michigan Alliance for Justice in Climate that is really developing priorities that are justice-centered. It's a statewide coalition. A lot of the work is happening in Detroit. And so that's one place where we're doing a lot of this work. MyCAN is at the table. Another thing I want to lift up is there was a Build Back Better coalition this year that, we're still hoping that we'll get some federal climate policy moved through. But what did come out of that work is that it was a very intersectional coalition, statewide coalition of people working for climate, but also for social justice provisions in those policies and family supportive provisions. And there were labor groups working for jobs provisions. And it was just such a great opportunity for everyone to come together and to all be talking about all of our issues together. And it's something that we really need to do more of in Michigan so that we have the power to move forward what we all care about and the issues that are really intersectional. So I see huge opportunities there, but there's a lot of work to do to build stronger relationships and to see our issues as interconnected.
And I'll put on my peace education hat real quick for the militarism piece of this. I was just on a national call this morning with Senator Warren and leaders of a bunch of major anti-war organizations about the military budget that's been released. And already, even though it was a $30 billion extra added on this year by the president himself, they're rattling the cages, the Raytheons, United Dynamics, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. They all are making, if you look at the stock market, their stock prices are going well because they're selling more weapons. This is money that we don't have to invest in communities. And we need to make that linkage. And that's what most of these groups are trying to do in terms of this. Also, the military has one of the biggest carbon footprints of any organization. It's bigger than some nations of the world, the US military, because we have bases in 800 areas and we move a lot of people and materials great distances. So we have an incredible impact that way that we need to link those things together. There's a couple more questions that came up on the chat, and then I want to leave Bob Barnhart, our president of GLUNA, a chance to say a few words before we disembark here shortly. So let's see what we have here. How to capture the attention of those most exposed and most able to adapt to climate, or most exposed and most able to adapt to climate risk. The wealthy can afford to pump out their Michigan basements. Obviously, some cannot. Anybody want to take a thing about how to capture the attention? Okay, good.
One, I don't think we should start with climate change. I think we should start with issues that they care about. And so you go talk to people and you understand what they're struggling with. What's the issue that they're active on? And then you collaborate around that, you build trust, and you start finding solutions that make sense. For us, we have literally one neighborhood of naturally occurring affordable housing left in the city of Ann Arbor. I mean, we are, just to give you a sense, we have this neighborhood, its home value, average home value is about 150,000. The city itself, across the rest of the city, 452,000 is the value of the average home in Ann Arbor. And so it's called Bryant. We have the goal of making it the first fully decarbonized neighborhood in America. We've worked for about 18 months with residents there. All the money we fundraise stays with the residents. They've designed the program. We help come in and fundraise, but it is they're literally driving the conversation. It is the most exciting project and the hardest project that I get to work on. But I don't think you start with our values. You start with their values.
So something that is very common in the city of Grand Rapids is that communities of color don't trust the city. That's just where we're at. From over policing to lack of affordable housing and not really feeling like people are being heard. That's a consistent thing that we get feedback on in the city. So when we're looking to really engage with communities, we're looking for partners who are trusted in community. We're looking to form relationships with those organizations and really build a level of trust so that they can see that we are looking to not be extractive in community, that we're looking to partner with them and looking to partner on issues that they find most important, just as Missy said. And we're letting them take center stage, letting their organizations be compensated for the work that they're doing in partnership with us, making sure that we're finding grant dollars to ensure that they're able to do the work. And that way we can establish that feedback that we need while promoting trust.
Kate, did you want to add anything to that before I hand this over to Bob?
No, I think, yeah, I think those are great answers.
Okay, hang close, don't go away. I'm bringing up my friend Bob Barnhart to talk a little bit about GLUNA, the major sponsoring organization tonight.
Thank you very much, Terry. Hasn't this been an excellent program? Yes. I am so proud of the Greater Lansing United Nations Association because we bring you these types of programs. We bring you such intelligent and knowing individuals who can share the stories of the issues that are important to us in this world. These are issues that the United Nations are working on every day. These are issues that are all part of the sustainable development goals that were created by all of the nations working together in the United Nations. It is our work as the Greater Lansing United Nations Association to bring this information to you about what the UN is about and the work that it does. It is our job also to help promote the work of the UN and to help assure that they are receiving adequate finance through our taxes that we pay to our government, and our government then also shares some of that with the United Nations to meet their needs. We have dues that we owe. We are behind in some of the areas in our dues as a country, and so we need to push for that, and it is our role as advocates to do that. And so we give you those opportunities to be advocates for these types of issues. We also bring other issues to you that we think are important and that relate to the work of the United Nations and that make this a better world. So if you are not already a member of the Greater Lansing United Nations Association, I want to extend that invitation to you. If you are online, you can go to gluna.org and click on Join Us and become a member. If you're under 20, if you're 25 and under, it's free. If you're 26 and over, you can join for your first time for $25 for a year. And then there are others a little higher once you become a regular member. So I hope that you'll consider that. I also have a table here for those of you who are present, would like to speak with me a little bit more and a little bit more information on that. I want to thank you all for being here. And I thank all of those who have joined us online. I know that you learned a lot as I did. And hopefully we can take this knowledge and contact and look up what is your community. If you're not living in one of these communities that were spoken of tonight, Lansing area, we need work. And I know my township is doing a lot, but I want to it urges me to look online at what my township is doing and learn a little bit more and to help push to be sure that we are doing the things that can be done to make this, to mitigate the climate issues that we are facing. So thank you so much for your presentations, and thank you all for being here. Have a good evening.
A final big round of applause for our guests who came from across the state tonight. We want them to drive home safely. And to our friend Kate up in Traverse City, speedy recovery. Thanks for your leadership these number of years here. Continue to do the good work. We all have work to do. Again, thanks for coming out tonight. A big round of applause for yourselves, for finding yourselves in this community. And with that, we're dismissed.